Welcome to Boring History for Sleep. It's me. Get comfortable. Dim the lights. If you like, you can subscribe. It's free, and if you have any comments or questions, feel free to leave them. People from all around the world do. Today, we will learn about ancient civilizations. We will explore the everyday lives of people long ago. We will discover quiet moments from medieval times and learn about forgotten historical figures. For example, did you know that the ancient Thebes once assembled an elite military force consisting of 150 pairs of gay male lovers? They went undefeated in war. It is easy to get lost in the grand sweep of history, but sometimes it is good to stop and smell the roses. To learn about the small things in the past can make the big things more clear. So let us take a break from the 24-hour news cycle and the stress of modern life and dive into the deep waters of history. Thank you for watching. The day begins slowly, as though even Paris itself is still recovering from the night before. You stir in a narrow bed, the kind with iron posts that squeak dramatically at the slightest movement, as though auditioning for a role in your life. The mattress is lumpy, uneven, and sagging in ways that make you question both physics and the integrity of whoever sold it to you. But it is yours, or at least yours for as long as rent holds out, and that makes it strangely comforting. The first thing you notice is the light. Not a bold, cinematic beam of sunshine, but a pale, reluctant glow slipping through curtains that haven't been washed in living memory. Dust motes drift lazily in the air, catching that thin light and turning your room into a sort of accidental snow globe. It's not majestic, but it is quietly hypnotic, especially when you're still half asleep. You can hear the muffled city outside, carriages clattering over cobblestones, an occasional motor car sputtering like an impatient kettle, and faintly hissing. The song of a street vendor announcing yesterday's bread at a discount. The air smells faintly of damp plaster and turpentine, because your neighbor upstairs fancies himself the next Picasso and believes that art requires ventilation to be optional. Overlaying that scent is cigarette smoke, always cigarette smoke creeping under the door from someone down the hall who apparently never sleeps. It's Paris in the 1920s, and this is what mornings smell like. Stale coffee, paint fumes, cheap tobacco, and possibility. You stretch your back, complaining slightly, and shuffle to the cracked mirror leaning against the wall. The reflection is not glamorous. Hair flattened on one side, the other side staging a dramatic rebellion. You smooth it down with a splash of cold water from the chipped basin, the kind that always feels colder than seems reasonable. No hot tap here, but you remind yourself that this is Montparnasse, and Montparnasse is not about comfort. It is about atmosphere. It's about being exactly where things are happening, even if those things involve existential arguments shouted over bad wine. Breakfast is, as usual, a modest affair. You rummage through a cupboard that contains mostly empty bottles and a questionable jar of jam that looks older than you. Eventually, you settle for the traditional Bohemian breakfast. Strong black coffee, and if fortune smiles, a small piece of bread. The coffee is not smooth or refined. It is harsh, almost confrontational, but it does the job. One sip and you feel slightly more awake, slightly less like a character in a forgotten attic. If you're very lucky, there's butter. If not, you shrug. In this world, sustenance is measured less by calories and more by caffeine content. As you sip, you hear voices drifting up from the street. A woman laughs too loudly. A bicycle bell chimes. A dog barks in rhythmic defiance of all things orderly. The neighborhood is waking up in layers, each sound adding to the texture of the morning. It is not serene in the conventional sense, but there is something oddly soothing in the familiarity of it. You've heard these sounds so many mornings that they have become part of your internal clock, as reliable as church bells. You glance at your notebook lying open on the table. Last night's scribbles are still there. Half a poem. Some doodles that may or may not be caricatures of your friends, and a line you cannot remember writing that simply reads, "The moon owes me rent." You decide it is either brilliant or nonsense, and in Paris, those categories are often indistinguishable. Your clothes hang on a single hook by the door. A dress, slightly wrinkled, but passable for café life. You pull it on, adjust the hem, and add a scarf, because scarves make even poverty look intentional. Shoes next scuffed, but reliable. When you open the door, the hallway greets you with peeling paint. The faint smell of boiled cabbage from someone's kitchen, and the sound of a radio crackling faintly through thin walls. Someone has put on jazz. The trumpet squeals, half muted by plaster, but it still lifts your step. Descending the narrow staircase, you run your hand along the banister, polished not by care, but by decades of desperate hands, clutching it for balance. Outside, the cobblestones are damp from last night's rain, glistening like they've been dressed for the day. The sky is still pale, holding on to the coolness of morning. People bustle past you with baskets, satchels, or nothing at all but their own hurried thoughts. You feel the city tugging at you as though it has things planned and you are expected to attend. Not an official invitation, of course, but a general sense that if you stay inside too long, you'll miss something important. An argument about art, a sudden burst of music, a whispered rumor about a café where something extraordinary is happening. In Montparnasse, something extraordinary might mean a drunken painter falling off a stool, but still, it counts. The truth is, mornings here are not glamorous. They are hungry, damp, and a little frayed around the edges, yet they are also filled with anticipation. Every day is a stage waiting for its performers. And as you stand there, clutching your scarf against the breeze, you realize that you are part of the performance, even if your role is still unclear. The thought makes you smile faintly. You adjust your step and begin moving toward the inevitable center of Bohemian life. Because no matter how small your room, how sparse your cupboard, or how lumpy your mattress, the of Montparnasse are always open, always waiting and always ready to turn coffee into conversation and conversation into legend. You arrive at the café, which is not so much a restaurant as it is a communal living room with better chairs and worse table manners. The sign outside is chipped, the windows fogged with condensation, and the door creaks in protest as you push it open. But once you're inside, the familiar warmth settles over you like a well-worn coat. This is where mornings in Montparnasse truly begin, not in the cramped bedsits, not in the dim corridors, but here, over a cup of coffee that will be stretched until it begs for mercy. The smell is unmistakable. Roasted beans, cigarette smoke, yesterday's wine, and the faintest trace of spilled absinthe clinging to the floorboards. It's not unpleasant. It's simply Paris. Tables wobble, glasses clink, and the ceiling fans turn with the slowness of things that know they will never actually help. You slide into a chair that rocks slightly under your weight, a reminder that stability is a rare luxury in this world. The tabletop bears the scars of countless arguments, knife scratches, stains, and the circular ghosts of abandoned cups. You order coffee, the cheapest ticket to lingering. The waiter barely looks at you. He has long since learned that you, and people like you, will occupy his tables for hours on end. A single drink becomes a full day's worth of residence. He sighs, but delivers your cup with a clatter, and you cradle it as though it were both breakfast and religion. The first sip is bitter enough to make you wince, but that's part of its charm. You are not here for luxury. You are here for atmosphere, for the peculiar sense of belonging that seeps from these cracked walls. Around you, the café is alive. Painters with smudges of color on their sleeves argue about whether art must imitate life or escape from it. Poets recite lines at volumes best described as obnoxiously confident. Students with notebooks sketch theories they will abandon by evening. And women like you sit at the tables, smoking, elegantly or not so elegantly, adding their voices to the chorus. In this space, you are not confined by polite expectations. You are not someone's daughter, or sister, or secretary. You are simply another mind in the fray, equal parts participant and spectator. The conversations swirl around you in multiple languages. French, English, German, Italian, all tangled together in a kind of symphonic chaos. You catch fragments. Someone denouncing capitalism, another praising Freud, someone else insisting that Cubism is already dead. Opinions change by the hour, but the passion never does. That is oddly soothing. The noise has a rhythm, a pulse that you learn to sink into, as though the cafe itself is breathing. Your single coffee cools slowly, the surface rippling every time someone bangs the table in emphasis. You don't mind? The act of sipping, no matter how infrequently, gives you permission to stay. And staying is everything, because the cafe is where life happens. Your room is too small, too lonely. The streets are too restless. too exposed. Here, there is both noise and safety, chaos and community. This is where ideas are born, where friendships form, and where boredom has no foothold. Occasionally, someone passes something more than coffee across the table, like a small vial, a folded packet of powder, a whispered promise of inspiration, an escape. You notice it, but do not react. It is as much a part of the cafe as the chipped cups and the cracked tiles. Some take it eagerly, leaning back with glassy eyes, words suddenly slower, softer, as though wrapped in gauze. Others treat it like an old acquaintance, one they neither love nor entirely trust, but cannot seem to dismiss. You stir your coffee, watching the dark liquid swirl, and wonder where the line lies between indulgence and dependence. The cafe does an odd answer. It only provides the stage, the backdrop against which every choice is made. The rest is up to you. And so you sit hour after hour, listening, laughing occasionally, scribbling notes when inspiration strikes. The day passes, almost without you noticing. Outside, the light shifts, the shadows lengthen, and the city beyond the glass grows restless again. Inside, the conversations grow louder, the laughter sharper, the air thicker with smoke and secrets. You've been here all day, but it feels like no time at all. And as dusk begins to settle, you realize that the cafe is only one act of the play. The real stage comes alive when the gas lamps flicker on and the city leans into its nocturnal self. The streets outside are calling, humming with energy, with music, with the promise of something slightly dangerous. Heroin arrives in Paris almost the way gossip does, slipping quietly into conversations, passed from hand to hand, until suddenly it feels like it has always been there. You hear about it first in whispers, perhaps from a friend of a friend who claims it sharpens the senses, makes the nights longer, the music brighter. Soon enough, it is no longer a rumor, but a presence, folded into the fabric of Montparnasse's life, like another eccentric guest at the cafe table. For Bohemian women, it comes not with fanfare, but with small rituals. A powder here, a vial there, something slipped into the same pockets where scraps of poems and sketches are carried. It has a strange allure, promising release from hunger, from fatigue, from the relentless noise of the city. When you are tired of gray mornings and cramped rooms, it feels like a doorway opening, one that doesn't ask for rent money. Like any new arrival in the neighborhood, it is greeted with both curiosity and suspicion. You find it at parties first, where the jazz is loud and the wine is cheap. A friend leans over with a conspiratorial smile, offers you something folded carefully into paper. The conversation carries on, the laughter swells, and in the haze of smoke and music, you realize the night feels different, sharper, and softer all at once. For some, it becomes a quiet companion, tucked into the rhythms of daily life. For others, it is a passing experiment, a story to tell the next morning over coffee. What makes it feel remarkable in Montparnasse is how quickly it becomes just another part of the scenery. Just as cafes overflow with paint-stained fingers and ink-smeared notebooks, they now hold this too. It is not unusual to see someone's eyes a little too bright, their voice a little too quick, their laughter ringing just a bit longer than it should. If you look closely, you notice it everywhere. Like ivy climbing up the walls, easy to overlook at first, until suddenly it is impossible to ignore. Yet in this moment, as you sit in the middle of it, heroin feels less like a menace and more like an atmosphere. Something ambient, lingering in the smoke, humming in the music, woven into the restless energy of Montparnasse. It is not the only story of these streets, but it has arrived, and it will stay. You step out of the cafe and into the open night. At first, the air feels cooler than you expect, crisp against your face after the warm fog of smoke and whispered conversations inside. Paris after dark is not silent. Not really, it hums like a cat half asleep, restless in its own rhythm. Cobblestones gleam faintly, slick with the residue of the day's rain, reflecting the yellow pools of light cast by the gas lamps. Each lamp flickers with a faint hiss, a reminder that this city runs not just on dreams and desire, but also on plumbing and fuel and pipes that creak unseen. Walking down these streets at night, you notice how the lamps do not banish the dark so much as carve it into shapes. Patches of brilliance alternate with shadows that swallow whole doorways, entire alleys. You can pass within an arm's reach of another figure and barely register them until the flare of their cigarette betrays their presence. This dance between shadow and light becomes the nightly theater of Paris. The safe glow of the lamps, the hidden pockets where anything might be whispered, traded, or regretted. You follow the curve of the boulevard, and the gas lamps guide your steps like beads on a string. Some are grand, mounted on elegant iron posts that spiral with decorative confidence. Others lean slightly as if tired, their lights sputtering and uneven. They were once considered miracles, an entire city lit after dusk, no longer surrendered to the deep dark. Of course, people complain about them. Too dim, too costly, too prone to failure. The modern condition. Never satisfied with a miracle once it becomes ordinary. The night streets themselves are alive in ways the daytime cannot be. You hear it in the variety of footsteps, heels clicking in hurried staccato, boots dragging with exhaustion, soft shoes gliding with intention. Carriages still rumble past, though fewer now, their wheels clattering over the stones with the same ancient complaint. Above all of this, faint music seeps from doorways, a violin warming up, a piano improvising in a smoky club, a gramophone spinning a worn-out record for whoever still wants to dance. Then, of course, there are the women. Some walk with purpose, clutching books under their arms, heading home from work or study. Others linger deliberately in the lamplight, dressed in silk or cheap satin, waiting for company of a different kind. Glance is enough to tell who is which, but in the gaslight they all share the same glow. You might pass them quickly, avoiding eye contact, or you might exchange a nod that says more than words could. These streets are full of choices, most of them quiet, all of them binding in their own way. There is always a faint scent in the air-damp stone, coal smoke, a trace of perfume drifting behind someone you will never know. Add to that the sharper smells, roasted chestnuts from a vendor still open, horse droppings cooling in the gutter, the faint medicinal temps of disinfectant thrown out with the wash water. It is not glamorous, not truly, but somehow the mixture feels like home to this city. A place where decay and elegance are always just a breath apart. You notice how the lamps also shape time. Under their glow, hours stretch and fold differently. Midnight can feel eternal, lingering like a guest who refuses to leave, while dawn seems almost unthinkable. People who move through these streets often live as if the day were an afterthought, a necessary nuisance before night resumes. The heroin, the absinthe, the music, they all make more sense in the dark, under this trembling light. As you walk, you can't help but feel the city itself is watching you, not in a sinister way, but with a kind of quiet amusement. It has seen 1,000 nights like this. 10,000 figures wandering between its lamps and shadows, all thinking themselves unique. It knows the patterns, the lovers sneaking into side alleys, the artists carrying their canvases home, the addicts nodding in slow-motion silence. And now, here you are, another silhouette caught briefly in its light. The gas lamp ahead sputters, flares, and steadies itself again. You pause beneath it, listening to the faint hiss, watching your own shadow stretch long and uncertain across the cobblestones. For a moment, the whole city seems suspended, the music, the footsteps, even the damp air holding its breath. Then slowly it resumes, as if Paris had only winked at you, reminding you that night here is endless, cyclical, inexhaustible. After the wandering streets and the uncertain glow of the gas lamps, you return to the kind of place that anchors most lives in 1920s Paris, a rented room. It's not a grand salon with velvet drapes and gilded mirrors, but a space so modest you could almost stretch your arms and touch both walls at once. The small room retreat, as you might charitably call it. It's less a sanctuary and more a storage unit for your existence. Still, it is yours, and in a city where half the population seems to live in cafés and on park benches. That counts for something. You push open the door and step into the familiar scent. Stale tobacco mingling with old wallpaper paste, damp plaster. And maybe if you've had a good week, the faint perfume of flowers bought days ago and now long wilted in a chipped vase. The floorboards groan their usual greeting under your shoes. A single lamp with a yellowed shade offers light, but not much. It glows like a tired firefly, just enough to keep the shadows from swallowing the room whole. You set down your coat and realize, with a small sigh, that the room itself offers no distraction from yourself. There's a bed against one wall, narrow and practical, covered in a quilt that has clearly survived more than one tenant. A wooden chair leans unevenly in the corner. A wobbly table balances precariously under the weight of stacked papers, books, and perhaps a bottle or two. If you look closely, you can still see faint chalk marks from the last painter who rented this room, rough outlines of a figure long since abandoned. That's the way of it here. One dreamer leaves, another slips in, each layering their existence on top of the last like peeling wallpaper. It is here, in this small square of space, that Parisian nights often end. Not with the glamour of the cabaret or the thrill of the café, but with the quiet confrontation of four close walls and whatever substances you've brought back with you. Maybe a half-empty glass of red wine sits near your bed, staining the rim with circles. Maybe there's a folded paper packet, tucked discreetly in a drawer, waiting. Or perhaps, like many others, you've chosen to face the night without those comforts. Listening instead to the muffled symphony of neighbors above and below. Doors slam, laughter bursts, someone plays a violin badly. The walls of these boarding houses are not shy. You sit on the edge of the bed and notice how the springs creak, as if groaning under more than just your weight. It's the kind of bed that doesn't encourage lounging. You either lie down immediately and surrender, or you sit rigid, aware of its disapproval. The sheets are clean enough, though you suspect they've seen better decades. Still, after hours of wandering, they promise warmth, and warmth is its own form of luxury. What makes the room bearable, perhaps even precious, is the way it creates a cocoon. Out there, Paris is relentless bright, noisy, demanding. In here, the chaos is reduced to faint vibrations through the floorboards and the occasional gust of sound from the street. You're left alone with your thoughts, your exhaustion, and maybe your doubts. For an artist, this can be both curse and gift. Silence presses you to confront the emptiness of your canvas or notebook. Yet silence also gives you space to dream, to sketch, to imagine. The walls may be thin, but they still form a border around your own little empire of thought. On colder nights, the room feels less retreat and more trial. The small radiator, when it decides to cooperate, hisses like a grumpy old man, offering barely enough heat to thaw your fingers. You learn the art of layering, stockings, shawls, perhaps even a coat thrown over your blanket. This is not the Paris of glossy postcards. This is survival through ingenuity and stubbornness. But you endure, and in the endurance, the room becomes more than plaster and wood, becomes a stage where you prove to yourself you can last another day, another night. Sometimes when the moonlight slips through the thin curtains, the small room feels almost poetic. Shadows draw strange patterns on the wall, turning cracks into rivers, stains into landscapes. You sit there with your pen or brush, half amused at the irony. Some of the world's great movements are being conceived in rooms like this, spaces no larger than closets, where mice scurry in the corners and the only luxury is a working lock on the door. Yet here in this tiny cocoon, imagination is free to stretch far beyond the walls. You lie back at last, the ceiling pressing down gently with its weight of cracked plaster. The hum of the city fades into something softer, almost like a lullaby. And for a brief moment, this little retreat feels safe. Not glamorous, not grand, but yours a pause in the storm of Parisian nights. You close your eyes and let the room hold you, however imperfectly, till the world outside insists on your attention again. A shaft of sunlight slices through the grime of the window, rousing the young woman from her slumber. She rises, shakes the sleep from her eyes, and walks to the mirror. It's chipped and cracked, offering a fragmented reflection of the determined artist who stands before it. Her name is not important. She is known simply as Bohemian Woman. Her mornings begin like this, a ritual of bohemian dressing in her modest room above a Montparnasse bookshop. She pulls back the curtain to reveal a narrow wardrobe, its interior smelling faintly of lavender and old wood. Inside, suspended between two mismatched Motheton doors, hangs a jumble of skirts, blouses, and cardigans. None quite match, yet together they form a kind of uniform, a visual language that speaks of artistic rebellion and quiet revolution. She selects a long, flowing skirt, its fabric soft against her fingertips. It's not an original. She borrowed it from a friend, just as she might borrow a paintbrush or a poetic theory from one of the many artists she calls comrade. Today she decides it will be her canvas. On top, she throws a sheer white blouse, its lace collar unbuttoned and tied at her waist. Over this, she drapes a cardigan once a vibrant purple, now faded to the color of dried blood. Each garment tells a story of artistic camaraderie, of shared ideals and nights spent laughing in smoky cafés. The paint stains on the cardigan are not a blemish, but a badge of honor. Each blotch a testament to nights spent painting in the red light of a nearby cabaret. The frayed cuffs are not a sign of poverty, but a small, quiet rebellion against polite society's expectations. She doesn't consider herself a fashion leader, nor does she care to be one. But in her deliberate acts of dressing, she performs an identity, a visual declaration of her chosen family, her friends, her lovers, her life as an artist. In a time when women are fighting for the right to vote and for more freedom in a rapidly changing world, she finds her own way to express her independence. Her clothing is a shield, a defense against a society that would confine her to the domestic sphere. It's also a sword, a weapon with which she can fight for her place in the world as an artist and a woman. Her hair, a tangled mess of fiery red curls, escapes from beneath her scarf, mirroring the untamed spirit that burns within her. Her shoes, scuffed and worn, have walked the cobbled streets of Paris countless times. Each step, a small act of defiance against those who would judge her unconventional ways. Today she walks with purpose, her head held high, her chin tilted towards the sun. She is a living sketch, a work of art in motion, her every stride a brushstroke on the canvas of the city. As she steps out of her room and onto the bustling streets, she becomes a living sketch, a work of art in motion. The garish display of color and texture that is her clothing draws curious glances and disapproving stares. But she walks on, her head held high, her chin tilted towards the sun, a defiant smile playing on her lips. Let them stare. Let them gossip. She is not afraid to be different. In fact, she thrives on it. Her clothing is a form of currency, a way of buying acceptance and respect in a world that often tries to keep women like her down. She makes her way to the local cafés, those bohemian hubs, where artists and intellectuals gather to discuss the latest theories and trends. There, in the company of her fellow bohemians, she feels truly free. Together they form a patchwork gallery of sorts, a collection of eccentrics united by their creativity and authentic self-expression. In this haven of artistic expression, her clothing is not just a means of covering her body, but a tool for communicating her identity. She is a bohemian artist, a rebel with a cause, a woman ahead of her time, and she wouldn't have it any other way. The streets and cafés may belong to the city, but the true sanctuaries of the bohemian women of Paris lie elsewhere, in the studios and workshops scattered across Montparnasse and Montmartre. You climb a narrow staircase that smells faintly of turpentine, wet plaster, and last night's cigarettes. Each step creaks as though it remembers the procession of hopefuls who have already trudged this way, portfolios tucked under arms, paints rattling in bags. Heads full of visions, too large to fit inside these crumbling walls. The studio itself is hardly palatial. It is often just one high-ceilinged room in a converted warehouse or attic, lit by a single great window angled toward the northern sky. The light is pale, steady, and forgiving, a painter's light, unchanging, indifferent to the moods of weather. Beneath it, canvases lean against walls like tired soldiers, waiting their turn to be judged, reworked, or abandoned. Tables clutter with brushes, ink-stained rags, chipped mugs doubling as turpentine jars. Dust never really leaves. It only shifts politely from surface to surface, as though making space for new messes. You find the women here wearing smocks spattered with the entire rainbow, hair tied back loosely, fingers stained perpetually with pigment. Fashion fades at the threshold. Nobody cares about hymns or stockings when canvases demand attention. There is a kind of intimacy in this shared neglect of appearances, a recognition that here ideas outrank vanity. Yet, in their very focus, they seem more beautiful than they might at any salon. Their movements are purposeful, shoulders bent toward clay, brushes held like extensions of their hands, eyes narrowed in fierce concentration. The air is never quiet. If it is not the scrape of charcoal on paper, it is the dull thump of a mallet on marble. Someone reads aloud from a battered book, their voice muffled by cigarette smoke. Someone else hums tunelessly, lost in their own rhythm. A phonograph crackles in the corner, drowning in static, but still brave enough to deliver a jazz record purchased secondhand. The rhythm keeps pace with brushstrokes, sketches, and arguments that rise and fall in between. Arguments. Yes, there are always arguments. Should art be raw or refined? Is tradition a ladder to climb or a chain to break? Everyone here has an opinion, and every opinion is declared with passion. You learn quickly that the loudest voice is not always the truest, and that sometimes a quiet woman in the corner with charcoal on her cheek will produce work that silences the room entirely. The studio thrives on this friction, feeding creativity with disagreement the way kindling feeds a fire. Resources are scarce, and so sharing becomes second nature. Someone lends a brush, another trades a scrap of canvas, another offers half a loaf of bread during long afternoons. There is no shame in borrowing. Survival here depends on it. Money, when it appears, vanishes just as quickly spent on pigments, clay, or enough coffee to fuel another night's work. Hunger gnaws at the edges of the room, but ambition often drowns it out. You can almost trick yourself into believing inspiration is more filling than bread. Almost for sculptors. The workshops have a different atmosphere. The air is colder, chalkier, filled with the echoes of chisels and the fine dust that coats every surface, every eyelash. Blocks of marble loom like silent giants, waiting to be coaxed into form. The women here wield tools with a kind of reverence, striking, smoothing, chiseling, until something human begins to emerge from stone. Watching them, you feel a strange blend of awe and exhaustion. To shape stone is to wrestle with eternity, and yet they do it with steady, patient hands. And always there's laughter. Unexpected, irreverent, cutting through the seriousness. Someone tells a joke at their own expense. Someone mocks the absurdity of trying to capture the human soul in clay or pigment. The laughter binds them together, keeps them from drowning in their own intensity. These rooms are not only workshops of art, but workshops of survival, where camaraderie fills the gaps left by food and comfort. At the end of the day, when brushes are rinsed and canvases leaned carefully against walls, the room grows quiet. Dust hangs in the air like the residue of effort. Someone stretches, groaning at the ache in their shoulders. Someone else lights one last cigarette, as though sealing the day's work with smoke. You look around and realize these spaces, as modest and drafty as they are, hold more treasure than any palace. Here, lives are being poured onto canvas, molded in clay, immortalized in ink. Back outside the studio, reality presses in. Paint and clay do not pay rent, not in Paris, not in 1924. And certainly not when you read a woman staking her claim in a city already crowded with hungry dreamers. You carry your ambition like a torch, but a torch does not keep the landlord satisfied. And so begins the daily arithmetic of survival. What can be skipped, stretched, or improvised to make a franc last longer than logic says it should? The day often starts with coffee, though coffee may be a generous word. At the cheapest cafés, a few centimes will get you a cup so thin you can practically see the bottom through it. But it's hot, it's caffeinated, and it entitles you to sit for hours sketching or writing without being chased away. If you're flush rare but miraculous, you add a croissant, its flaky crumbs scattering like confetti over your notebook. More often, you nurse the liquid alone, convincing yourself the bitter taste counts as sustenance. Hunger sharpens your senses. You tell yourself, art demands sacrifice. That phrase becomes a kind of prayer. Rent comes next in the mental ledger. Rooms in Montparnasse or Montmartre are mercifully cheap compared to the boulevards. But cheap is still relative when you're reliving off the occasional sale of a sketch or the generosity of friends. To miss a payment means a landlord at your door, his fist heavy, his patience thin. You learn to charm, to promise, to barter with an air of confidence you do not always feel. Sometimes the bluff works. Sometimes it doesn't. Clothing stretches almost magically. Stockings with ladders are darned, redarned, and finally cut into rags. Shoes are resoled again and again until the cobbler sighs and tells you it's useless, but you keep wearing them anyway. Dresses are shared among friends. It's rotated like secret treasures so no one notices they've appeared at 3 salons in a row. Scarves disguise frayed collars. Pins hold together seems long past their prime. Every garment is a small battle won against the erosion of poverty. Food is more complicated. There are evenings of triumph when you manage a shared meal. bread still warm from the bakery. A wedge of cheese, a bottle of wine, whose cork splinters, but still pours. 5 women crowd around a rickety table, each contribution modest, yet together it feels like a feast. Other nights, supper is whatever you can find at a market stall just before closing, when vendors are desperate to unload bruised fruit or wilted greens. Soup becomes an art form, stretching scraps of carrot, onion, and a bone into something steaming and faintly comforting. Odd jobs provide a thin lifeline. You might pose as an artist's model, holding a pose until your muscles ache, paid just enough to cover bread and coal. You might copy manuscripts for a publisher, your handwriting cramping after hours of repetition. Some take jobs as waitresses, seamstresses, shop girls roles that blur the line between independence and exhaustion. Every franc earned disappears almost immediately, swallowed by the city's endless appetite. And yet, scraping by on pennies is not without its peculiar joys. There is a pride in survival itself, in outwitting the arithmetic of poverty day after day. You laugh about it with your companions, turning hardship into story, hunger into humor. We are rich, one says, raising a chipped glass of water in ideas. If not in francs, the toast feels genuine because, in a way, it is. Ideas have value here, even when they cannot be traded for coal. What keeps you going is not only determination, but also the knowledge that you are not alone. Every woman you know is fighting the same quiet battle, each with her own ledger of sacrifices and small victories. Together, you create a community bound not by wealth, but by endurance. Poverty, while relentless, becomes less isolating when it is shared. When laughter punctuates the gloom, when one loaf of bread is split 5 ways and still feels enough, even if you are broke, half-starved, and sharing a room where the wallpaper peels like old scabs, Paris still offers you a gift that costs nothing but your presence. Music. No, specifically jazz. It drifts from café doors, from cellars lit by flickering candles, from gramophones in smoky apartments where someone has begged, borrowed, or stolen a record. You do not need money to hear it. The sound leaks through windows, pours into the streets, and coils around you like a spell. The rhythm is unlike anything your ears have known. Classical music you've heard before, structured, respectable, carefully seated in velvet halls. But this is improvisation. Jazz is alive, breathing, unpredictable. A trumpet blasts like laughter you can't quite control. A saxophone sighs like a body pressed too close. Drums chatter, quick and reckless, like shoes scuffing across a dance floor at 3 a.m. And somewhere in the mix, a piano ties it all together, hammering out order and chaos at the same time. You feel it first in your chest. The bass thudding low syncs with your heartbeat. You sway before you even realize it, your foot tapping under the cafe table. Everyone else is doing the same: artists, writers, models, students half-dancing without leaving their chairs. Even the waiters nod along, though they pretend indifference. Jazz is contagious, and in Paris, it spreads faster than influenza. It is also, in a way, liberation. Women who are supposed to sip demurely at tea and speak softly about embroidery are now dancing wild in dim-lit basements, their skirts swishing. Above their knees, their hair bobbed short like they have no patience for centuries of decorum. Men who once strutted stiff in frock coats are loosening ties, shedding jackets, laughing too loudly. The rules unravel with every note. Jazz gives permission. Permission to move, to sweat, to be unruly. Sometimes you find yourself at one of the real clubs, the ones tucked in Montmartre, where Black American musicians play with an intensity that leaves you giddy. They came here after the war, tired of the racism back home, and Paris embraced them with open arms. You watch in awe as they fill the room with sound, and the room fills back with energy. It's impossible not to dance, even if your shoes are falling apart, even if you have no partner. You dance anyway, surrounded by strangers, the music binding you together more tightly than any introduction. There are nights when you can't get inside. The cover charge is too steep, or the line too long. But even then, you linger near the door, letting the rhythm leak into the street. Someone might pull out a cigarette, another a flask, and suddenly the sidewalk itself becomes a party. You're broke, but it doesn't matter. Jazz does not care about your bank account. It cares only that you listen, that you let it carry you. And in those moments, hunger fades. Rent, creditors, the gnawing worry of tomorrow all disappear. You are simply there, in Paris, at the center of a sound that belongs to no one and everyone. A trumpet note soars, and you soar with it. The drums break into a roll, and your pulse races to match. You are alive, exquisitely alive, in a world that so often tries to grind you down. Later, when the club empties and the lamps dim, you step out into the night. The city seems changed. The cobblestones glisten as though polished by the music itself. You hum fragments of melody as you walk, clinging to them like souvenirs. Jazz is not something you can hold in your hand, but it stays inside you, echoing long after the last note fades. In Paris, when you can't afford canvas or clay, or when the saxophone's last note fades and silence creeps in, you turn to the one tool that almost anyone can own, a notebook. Not the leather-bound luxury kind with gilt edges and creamy paper, but the flimsy, dog-eared versions sold at corner kiosks, meant for school children. The paper is thin, the lines crooked, but it is enough. Enough to capture a thought before it evaporates, to sketch the outline of a poem, to scribble a friend's address before you forget. Your notebook becomes an extension of yourself, stuffed in a pocket or slung at the bottom of a satchel already full of cigarette ash and bent postcards. The cover creases, the pages curl in the damp Paris air, and ink smudges where your hand lingers too long. It is not elegant, but then neither are you most days. What matters is that when the urge strikes suddenly, rudely, while you're sipping watery coffee, you can pull it out and catch lightning in a bottle. A poem about the way light hits the river at dusk. A letter you'll never send to someone back home who would not understand this new, unruly life you've chosen. Perhaps just a list. Things you need, things you can't have, things you dream about but don't dare say aloud. The cafés encourage this habit. For the price of one coffee stretched for hours until it goes cold, you can claim a table. Notebook open, pretending to be deeply occupied while really watching everyone else. A girl in a fur stole leans too close to a painter. A critic gestures wildly with his cigarette. A waiter rolls his eyes but delivers yet another thimble-sized espresso. All of it becomes fodder for your pages. Writing is as much eavesdropping as invention. There is also comfort in the act itself. The scratch of pen on paper, the pause as you chew your lips searching for the next word, the little blot of ink like an accidental signature. Writing is tactile, grounding. Doesn't matter if what you write is brilliant or banal. The page accepts it without judgment. You can spill secrets here, record absurd dreams, or draft manifestos you'll laugh at later. The notebook is both confessional and companion, always ready when the world feels too large. Other times, writing feels impossible. In those moments, you doodle instead spirals, flowers, absurd caricatures of your landlord. You paste in ticket stubs or wine labels scavenged from cafe tables. Even failure becomes material, and your notebooks accumulate not just writing but fragments of living. They are messy archives of a messy existence. There's a chance, of course, that these pages will never matter beyond yourself. They may molder in a drawer or vanish when you move on, left behind like an unpaid bill. Yet in the moment, each word feels important, an anchor tying you to your fleeting Bohemian life. The rush of impressions, the smell of roasted chestnuts, the echo of jazz through thin walls, the taste of cheap absinthe will vanish without a trace. And so you keep filling page after page, knowing full well that tomorrow you may hate today's work. But that is part of it. The compulsion, the cycle of hope and disappointment, the stubborn persistence. In this way, the notebook mirrors your life in Paris, fragile, improvised, sometimes absurd, but still undeniably yours. Imagine a smoky Parisian café filled with the aroma of fresh coffee and the lingering scent of Galois's cigarettes. The year is 1922. You push open the door and step inside. What do you see? A battle of wits is raging between the men nursing their drinks at small tables. Their voices rise and fall in heated debate, their words like weapons of mass creation. On one side are the café intellectuals, a motley crew of passionate artists, writers, and philosophers. They are the new avant-garde, a term coined by the poet and critic Guillaume Apollinaire to describe this very group. On the other side are the war veterans, men bearing both physical and emotional scars from the recent conflict. their experiences giving gravity to the political discussions. As you find a seat and order a coffee or perhaps a glass of wine, you can't help but be drawn into their lively conversation. They talk about everything from socialism and anarchism to surrealism and the latest artistic movements. It seems that there is no topic too controversial or too intellectual for these men to tackle. But what really sets the tone of the evening is the underlying current of emotion that runs through the room. These men are not just talking to fill the silence. They are searching for answers to the profound questions that have been raised by the recent world war. How could such horrors have been perpetrated? What is the role of the artist in society? And how can we create a better world from the ashes of the old? Their voices may be loud, their arguments intense, but there is always a sense of camaraderie that binds them together. For these men, the cafe is more than just a place to meet and debate. It is a battlefield where ideas are fought over and ultimately refined. It is also their home, a place where they can let down their guard and be themselves. As the night wears on, the wine flows, and the arguments become more heated, but never personal. There is a deep respect among them, even when they disagree most vehemently. And when the discussion turns to art, there is a sense of playfulness that enters the room. These men are not just serious thinkers, they are also some of the most creative minds of their generation. They are the ones who will push the boundaries of literature, painting, and film. And they do it with a sense of joy and wonder that is infectious. One of the regulars, the painter and writer Pablo Picasso, leans back in his chair and takes a sip of wine. He has been listening intently to the conversation, and now he speaks up in his thick Spanish accent. "I don't agree with all of your theories," he says, turning to the man next to him. "But I defend to the death your right to say them." This sentiment is echoed by everyone in the room. This is what makes the Café de Flore and the nearby Les Deux Magos the most important meeting places in Paris. They are not just cafes, they are incubators of ideas. And you, dear viewer, are right in the middle of it all. You feel the energy of creation crackling in the air around you. These are the men who will change the world, and they are doing it right here in this smoky, dimly lit room. As the night winds down, the debate continues, but the tone becomes more relaxed. The men begin to laugh and joke around, and there is a sense of camaraderie that settles over the room. They may be fierce opponents in the daytime, but in the evening they are friends, drinking, smoking, and making merry together. For these men, the cafe is more than just a place to meet and debate. It is a community, a place where they can be themselves and let down their guard. As you leave the cafe that night, you feel as though you have just witnessed something special, something that will stay with you for the rest of your life. The ideas that were born in this room will go on to change the world, and you were lucky enough to be there at the beginning. What did you think of our time travel adventure to 1920s Paris? If you enjoyed this experience, we invite you to subscribe to our channel for more exciting journeys through time. And if you're feeling extra generous, why not leave us a like or comment below? We would love to hear what you have to say. Paris does not run on coffee alone. Its coffee is for the daylight hours, for notebooks and noisy arguments that pretend to be intellectual. By night, the city shifts its allegiance to liquids that stain lips, cloud judgment, and make poets certain they've touched eternity. Wine and absinthe. Wine is everywhere. Red, cheap, poured into thick glasses that chip at the rim. It's rough on the tongue, sometimes sour, sometimes suspiciously watered down, but it's also comforting. A few francs can buy a bottle big enough to pass around the table, and soon everyone is laughing louder, talking faster, drawing with spilled drops on the paper tablecloth. Wine makes comrades out of strangers, smoothing over the jagged edges of debate. You drink it knowing full well that tomorrow's head will feel like someone struck it with a frying pan. But tonight, the warmth spreading through your veins makes even the drafty cafe feel welcoming. And then there is Absinthe the Green Fairy herself. The ritual of it feels almost sacred, even though it happens in rickety cafes with wobbly tables. The tall glass, the slotted spoon resting across the rim, the cube of sugar slowly dissolving as water drips down, turning the emerald liquid cloudy. You watch the transformation, mesmerized. It's alchemy on a small scale, a promise that something ordinary water, sugar, alcohol can become something transcendent. The taste is sharp, herbal, with anise curling on the tongue. Not everyone likes it. Some grimace, others pretend sophistication. But you persist, because absinthe isn't just a drink, it's a statement. A declaration that you are part of the lineage of artists and dreamers who claimed inspiration from this glass. You can almost feel Baudelaire nodding approvingly in some spectral corner, even as your stomach knots and your vision grows pleasantly fuzzy. Conversations shift under absinthe's influence. They lose their rigid edges, words slurring into poetry, whether intended or not. Someone recites a line that makes no sense, but feels profound. Someone else claims to see patterns in the candle wax. You write nonsense in your notebook, and are convinced it is genius. It may be gibberish by daylight, but in the moment it glows with conviction. There is danger in it, of course. It's too much wine, and you stumble home with pockets emptier than before. Too much absinthe, and the fairy's charm turns cruel, leaving you sick and trembling in the morning. But the risks feel worth it when the room tilts into golden light. When laughter bubbles louder than reason, when worries about rent and hunger fade into the blur. Sometimes you swear you can hear the city itself drinking along with you. The clink of glasses from every café, the murmurs and bursts of laughter spilling into the streets, the collective exhale of 1,000 people escaping the heaviness of the day. Wine and absinthe are not luxuries. Here they are survival, a different sort than bread or shelter. They offer moments of forgetting, moments when the night feels endless and kind. And when at last you stagger outside, the cool air sobers you only slightly. The stars overhead look smeared, as though they too have been drinking. You hum a fragment of jazz, clutching your coat tighter. Your footsteps are uneven, but your heart feels light, carried by that peculiar mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. Paris in the 1920s looks dazzling at first glance, glowing, jazz playing, laughter spilling from café doors, but underneath the shadow of the Great War lingers everywhere. You don't need to look for it. It finds you. It's in the way streets twist around monuments engraved with endless lists of names. It's in the awkward silence when a man with one sleeve pinned up passes by. It's in the hush that falls when conversation veers too close to trenches and shells. Even in your circle of Bohemian companions, the war is a quiet ghost. Many of them were too young to fight, but not too young to remember. Ration lines, black-edged telegrams, the muffled sobs of neighbors, those memories cling stubbornly. You sometimes wonder if the wild hunger for art and noise now is a kind of rebellion against that silence, against those years when the city itself seemed to grieve. There are the veterans, too. They sit in cafés, faces lined far beyond their age, moving their cups slowly, as though each gesture takes effort. Some joke about their wounds, others say nothing at all. You notice the haunted look in their eyes when a car backfires, the stiff way they shift in their chairs as if their bodies remember things their mouths refuse to speak. And then there are the invisible wounds. Harder to notice until suddenly someone storms out of a café for no reason, or drinks until they cannot stand. You hear fragments of stories, told casually, but with an edge sharp enough to cut. Mud, waist deep, rats the size of cats, weeks without sunlight. Someone recalls losing a brother at Verdun, then shrugs as though it's no more important than misplacing a coat. The detachment makes it worse. You feel it in your chest, the way they have packed their grief into tidy phrases just to survive. Even absinthe nights cannot fully drown the war. Sometimes it surfaces in dreams, flashes of barbed wire, the thud of distant shells, a faceless crowd pressing forward into smoke. You wake unsettled, not sure whose memory you are carrying, your own or someone else's. It doesn't matter. In Paris, the war belongs to everyone. And yet, in a strange way, the memory binds the city together. That shared scar shapes the present, fueling both despair and creation. If you ask why people in Montparnasse paint until their fingers ache, or argue until dawn about revolutions they barely understand, or throw themselves into love affairs as though the world might end tomorrow, it's because many of them have already seen the world end once. You can almost feel the dual heartbeat of the city, grief and defiance. Paris mourns, yes, but Paris also insists on living louder than ever, as if to prove it cannot be silenced. For every limp and missing limb there is a new song. For every quiet widow at her window, there is a dancer kicking her legs high on the stage. It is not denial, it is survival. Bohemian Paris is a tangled web of intense friendships, bitter rivalries, and smoky cafés. It's a place where artists live and die for their passion, and where the line between love and hate is as blurred as the watercolors on a palette. In this world, there are three types of characters. The first are the struggling artists, are the passionate creatives who can't make enough money to buy their own bread, let alone a canvas or paints. So they spend their days begging for coins and their nights sharing what little food they have in Montmartre's smoky cafés. Talking about nothing and everything under the dim gaslight, they dream of being the next big thing, of having their work displayed in the Louvre, of escaping the poverty that's slowly eating away at their souls. But most of all, they dream of being seen, of having someone appreciate their art, of not dying alone in a garret full of cats and half-finished paintings. Then there are the Bohemian companions. These are the fellow dreamers who become your friends after you've shared a bottle of wine with them and watched the sunrise together along the Seine. Friendships bloom after you've lent them a match to light their cigarette and they've introduced you to the girl with the sad eyes and the red dress who haunts the Latin Quarter. These are the people who understand your hunger both for food and for art, who've seen the same colors in your eyes and the same stars in your paintings, who know your name and the tune that haunts your sleep. And then there are the rival artists. These are the ones who make your blood boil and your absinthe taste like vinegar. These are the artists who oscillate between being your best friends and your worst enemies, who steal your lines, your exhibitions, and sometimes even your girlfriends, are the ones who make you want to throw your paintbrush at the next salon day refuses. Where your work was rejected alongside Gauguin and Van Gogh. They are the ones who remind you that there's only room at the top for one artist, and that the competition is fierce and unforgiving. In this Paris, magnetic connections are made and broken over cigarettes and cups of black coffee. Nights can be intoxicating. You find yourself in a cramped apartment with 4 walls and a roof, a handful of fellow artists, and a bottle of wine that's older than your father. There are readings of poetry, arguments about art, and whispered secrets beneath the dawn light. And when the sun finally rises, you walk along the Seine with a sense of foreboding, knowing that the day will come when one of those nights will end in disaster. Rivalries can be destructive, but they can also be passionate. You find yourself in a small gallery in Montmartre, watching your rival get his first solo exhibition. And you want to tear down his paintings, not because they're bad, but because you're jealous of the applause. Later, you find yourself in a smoky bistro, arguing about stolen ideas and exhibitions while your Bohemian companions watch with amusement, knowing that this is just another step in your artistic journey. There's a rhythm to these nights, a push and pull between creation and destruction, between passion and regret. There's the argument, often started by absinthe and pride, followed by a long silence, then the apology. The shared bottle and the promise to do better. And when the night is over, you left wondering if the other artist meant what he said, and if you were really that bad. In Bohemian Paris, the line between love and hate is blurred. Today's rival can be tomorrow's ally, and the only constant is change. You find yourself shifting from one group to the next, from one style to the next, from one love affair to the next. And with each new experience, you add another layer to your art, another scar to your soul, another story to tell in your paintings. So if you ever find yourself in Bohemian Paris, beware of the tangled web that it can make you. Beware of the intense friendships and the bitter rivalries of the smoky cafés and the whispered secrets, of the nights that burn too bright and the days that end in disaster. For this is a world where the stakes are high, the passions are higher. And the only thing that matters is capturing the fleeting moment before it disappears like smoke in the wind. If there's one group always hovering on the edges of your bohemian adventure, it is the police. You may not think of yourself as a criminal. You are, after all, merely trying to write the next great novel while living on bread crusts and questionable coffee. But to the watchful eyes of the law, you and your circle are suspicious by default. The police in Paris are everywhere, their boots clicking on cobblestones, their lamps cutting through the dark alleys where you and your friends often linger. They have the weary patience of men who have seen too many drunken arguments spill into the street, too many pocketbooks vanish from too many coats. You are not necessarily guilty of these things, but by existing on the margins poor, restless, and unconventionally, are close enough to trouble to be swept into it. It starts with the small things. Constable frowns at the noise pouring out of your favorite cafe. A patrolman asks for your papers, suspicious of your foreign accent. Even sketching too long on the steps of a public building can earn you a sharp order to move along. The city likes its artists when they are tidy and successful. The struggling ones clutter the sidewalks. Sometimes the encounters are almost comical. A drunken poet is dragged off for reciting verses a little too loudly in the wrong neighborhood. A painter, in a heroic effort to avoid paying his wine bill, is escorted to the station, muttering about bourgeois oppression. The gendarmes themselves are not immune to humor. They roll their eyes, shake their heads, and chalk it up to Bohemian nonsense. But behind the eye-rolling lurks the harder edge of authority. Because make no mistake, if you are too bold, too careless, or too loud in your politics, the law turns less amused. Pamphlets criticizing the government are not charming. They're dangerous. A heated cafe debate can be dismissed as artistic passionate till someone in uniform overhears a little too much about revolution. Then, the same voices that filled the night with laughter can find themselves hushed in interrogation rooms. You learn quickly the delicate balance between living freely and living recklessly. Keep your eccentricity just this side of respectable. Paint your wildest visions, but perhaps avoid hanging them where the police commissioner drinks his morning coffee. Argue about philosophy, but lower your voice when the conversation turns to politics. Always, always have a plausible excuse ready if a patrolman asks why you are out at 3 a.m, stumbling home with ink-stained fingers and no money in your pockets. The law also plays its role in your daily life through the endless regulations of the city. Licenses for street performers, restrictions on gatherings, curfews in certain quarters, all the bureaucratic clutter that you, with your limited funds and limited patience, inevitably stumble over. The Paris police may not care much about your art, but they care very much about paperwork. Woe to the busker without a permit, or the cafe that serves wine past allowed hours, and woe to you if you happen to be caught inside when the raid comes. Yet, in a strange way, even the police become part of the rhythm of Bohemian life. You begin to recognize the officers on your street. You learn which sergeant has a soft spot for painters, and which one has no patience for poets. Sometimes, after too many nights of seeing you, they sigh and wave you along instead of dragging you in. Familiarity breeds tolerance, if not exactly friendship. Still, you never quite forget that the law is a looming presence. You live your life knowing it could intrude at any time, breaking up a gathering, closing a favorite tavern, or taking a little too much interest in your circle of acquaintances. It adds a certain tension, a background hum of unease. But perhaps that too is part of the thrill. The contrast sharpens your nights, the laughter feels brighter, the arguments livelier, the friendships deeper, because you know they exist in defiance of authority that might, at any moment, decide to snuff them out. Love in Montparnasse does not arrive like a tidy romance novel with flowers, sunsets, and neat conclusions. Instead, it stumbles in the doorway late at night, dripping rain onto the floorboards, asking if there's any bread left, curls up in smoky cafés, whispers over chipped glasses of wine, and wanders with you down narrow streets where gas lamps flicker. It is sudden, inconvenient, passionate, and sometimes catastrophic, but always woven into the fabric of Bohemian life. You cannot live in Montparnasse without brushing against it. The neighborhood is alive with artists, models, dancers, musicians, young restless souls, brimming with ideas and loneliness. It feels inevitable that you find yourself drawn to someone across a crowded cafe. Not because they are especially glamorous, but because they are there, sharing the same hunger, the same stubborn dream of beauty. A borrowed scarf, a shared cigarette, and unexpected laughs, thaw things ignite into long nights and tangled mornings. Love here is not polished. It is raw and practical. A romance might begin because rent is easier to bear when two people share a room, even if the bed squeaks and the ceiling leaks. Or because one of you has a spare loaf of bread and hunger is a surprisingly persuasive matchmaker. And yet, in these arrangements, something more often sparks an intimacy born of survival, where every small kindness feels enormous. But passion can burn too hot. You are surrounded by rivals, friends, admirers, and critics, all packed into the same streets and cafés. A lover today may be someone else's muse tomorrow. Jealousy arrives as easily as laughter. Arguments flare over the smallest things, a misplaced glance, an ambiguous line in a poem, a careless sketch of someone else. And still, even after the quarrels, the pull remains too strong, and you find yourself drifting back to the same embrace. There is tenderness, too. Long walks along the Seine in the early morning, when the city is quiet and the sky is still pale with dawn. Shared blankets in freezing rooms where bodies pressed together are the only heating available. Annas, left on café tables. Poems scrawled on the backs of receipts. Sketches passed across the counter with a shy smile. These are not grand gestures, but they carry more weight than bouquets or diamonds, because they come from people who have nothing to spare except themselves. And then there are the fleeting loves, gone as quickly as they arrived. A dancer who disappears to another city. A painter who finds inspiration in someone new. A student returning home when the money runs out. These romances leave behind not broken hearts, so much as faint echoes a scarf left behind. A painting abandoned, a phrase that lingers in your notebook long after the person has vanished. In Montparnasse, you learn that love need not last forever to matter. There is a peculiar honesty to these relationships. Without wealth or stability, there is no illusion of permanence. You love fiercely because you know it could end at any moment. And when it does, you return to the cafés, to the circle of friends, to the music and smoke and laughter that cushion the fall. Love is part of the rhythm, not the whole song. Sometimes, though, you glimpse something steadier. Two figures leaning close in the corner of a café year after year, their bond weathering every quarrel and every poverty-stricken winter. They're proof that even in the chaos of Montparnasse, love can root itself deeply. Perhaps not often, but enough to make you believe that your own fleeting romances might, just might, turn into something lasting. And so you drift through Montparnasse with an open heart, knowing you will stumble, knowing you will ache, but also knowing that in this place, love is as much a part of survival as bread or wine. It keeps you alive, keeps you human, keeps the nights from being too long and the mornings too cold. Hunger in Montparnasse is not dramatic, not the sort of hunger that makes headlines or stirs grand charity campaigns. It is quieter, more constant, the background hum of life for Bohemian women and their companions. It comes in the form of a thin broth stretched too far, the single heel of bread sliced carefully into 4 pieces to last until the morning. You live with it the way you live with the damp walls of your garret, complaining sometimes. It's joking often, but rarely surprised. You notice it first in the little things. The way your skirts hang more loosely by winter's end. The way your fingers tremble just slightly as you hold your pen. Friends joke that cigarettes and coffee count as meals, and you laugh too, though your stomach disagrees. There is a strange pride in being able to survive on so little, as though endurance itself is proof of your artistry. After all, what is creativity without sacrifice? Or so the story goes. The cafés are full of clever tricks to stave off hunger. You sit for hours over a single cup of coffee, savoring the faint bitterness, as though it were a banquet. A friend may order wine, and you stretch the bread basket to its very limits, tearing crumbs into 100 pieces just to keep your hands busy. Sometimes kindness appears in unexpected places, the cafe owner who adds a splash more milk to your coffee, or the friend who pretends not to like their soup and pushes it your way. These small gestures of generosity keep everyone afloat, like stepping stones across a river. But hunger has its stubborn humor. Find yourself talking about food as if it were poetry. Entire conversations spin out over the memory of a roast chicken or the perfection of an apple tart once tasted months ago. You linger at bakery windows, inhaling the scent of butter and yeast like perfume. It is absurd, and yet it is also human, this ability to turn deprivation into imagination, to make jokes when the pangs grow sharp. Of course, hunger leaves marks beyond laughter. Fatigue settles into your bones, making the climb up to your garret feel twice as long. Colds linger longer, coughs grow deeper, and sometimes you envy the plumpness of shopkeepers who seem to live in a different world entirely. Yet even in weakness, resilience is born. You share with friends, you stretch what little you have, and you discover that survival itself becomes a kind of stubborn art. There are moments of triumph, too. The unexpected coin found in a coat pocket, the sudden sale of a sketch, the friend who lands a paying job. Then comes the feast. Bread thick with butter, stew simmering with meat, wine poured generously instead of stingily. For a night, hunger is banished and laughter grows louder, looser, more certain. These small victories are remembered as fondly as masterpieces, because they remind you that tomorrow may bring something better. In a way, hunger is the thread binding the community together. Everyone knows its bite, and everyone knows the relief when it loosens. Resilience is not just an individual trait, it is collective. The woman who shares her loaf today may be the one in need tomorrow, and so the cycle continues. In that constant exchange, you discover a kind of solidarity that feels as nourishing as any meal. And so you carry on, with stomach sometimes empty, but spirit rarely so. Hunger shapes you, but resilience defines you. It teaches you that beauty can grow even in thin soil, that creativity can spark even in cold rooms, and that laughter can echo even when dinner is only a crust of bread. Paris in the 1920s is never still. Even when you sit in the quiet of your tiny room, even when hunger presses at your ribs or fatigue pulls your eyelids down, you can feel it, the steady thrum of the city, like a heartbeat just beneath the cobblestones. The pulse carries through the cafés, where arguments and laughter mix in equal measure. Through the streets where vendors call out the day's wares, through the tram bells and the faint hiss of gas lamps. It is restless, insistent, and somehow reassuring, like the city itself is reminding you that you are part of something larger. You hear it in the mornings first, when delivery carts rattle over the uneven stones and a bakery's doors fling open with the smell of fresh bread. Even if you cannot afford a loaf, the aroma is intoxicating, filling the air with a promise of sustenance and rhythm. Children's voices chase one another along the sidewalks, while shop shutters creak up like eyelids waking from heavy sleep. And over it all, the sound of footsteps, an endless percussion of shoes, boots and clogs, each one telling a different story of purpose or aimless wandering. Automobiles growl beside horse-drawn carts, bicycles weave through gaps, and the avenues thrum with impatient horns. Street vendors shout with more urgency, and cafés spill their patrons onto sidewalks where tables huddle like conspirators. The city becomes a stage, and you, whether you like it or not, are part of the play. Every cough of a motor car, every scrape of a chair, every burst of accordion music from a passing performer layers into the complex composition that is Paris's daily soundtrack. And then comes the night, when the pulse doesn't slow, it shifts. Gas lamps throw halos of amber light onto slick pavements, and jazz drifts through open doors, muffled but enticing. You walk along boulevards where shadows stretch long and conversations grow hushed. And yet the heartbeat of Paris is still there, steady beneath your feet. Lovers walk in pairs, students stumble out of bars. A policeman's whistle pierces the air briefly before fading back into the steady rhythm. Even when you return to your attic, you can still feel it, echoing faintly through your walls. It would be easy to think that Montparnasse alone drives this pulse, the poets, the artists, the dreamers like you. But in truth, it is everyone. The seamstress rushing to finish work before dark. The laborer carrying crates into a cellar. Grand lady stepping out of her car onto the Champs-Élysées. All their lives, all their movements, feed the rhythm of the city. You may be poor, you may be tired, but you are never alone in the dance. There is comfort in that thought. No matter how small your existence feels, no matter how fragile your dreams, Paris's heartbeat includes you. Every brushstroke, every poem scribbled on a napkin, every night spent talking instead of sleeping, it all joins the larger symphony. You are part of the pulse, and in return, it carries you forward. Legacies in Montparnasse are not always grand. They are not towering monuments or engraved statues gleaming under Parisian skies. Instead, they are tucked into quiet corners, left behind like whispers in a city that forgets nothing. You notice them most when you wander with no particular aim, letting the streets lead you. A scuffed name carved into a café tabletop. Initials that have survived countless cigarettes and spilled drinks. A sketch pinned behind the counter, drawn years ago by someone who couldn't pay their bill, but left a piece of themselves behind. These are the true memorials of Bohemian life, humble, unassuming, yet curiously enduring. You might stumble into a second-hand bookshop, and there, wedged between thick volumes on philosophy, is a tattered notebook.
I waited
Inside, faded ink reveals fragments of a poem, perhaps a love letter, perhaps a lament, certainly the product of one of those countless late nights over weak coffee. No one remembers the author's name, but the words linger, carrying the voice of someone who once sat just as you are now, uncertain and hopeful all at once. It is not fame, but it is survival, a kind of quiet immortality inked on thin paper. Even the walls of Montparnasse seem to hold memories. You run your hand along plaster patched and repainted, and beneath every layer is another story tenant who laughed, quarreled, starved, celebrated, and moved on. The stairwells echo with their footsteps long after they've gone. There is something strangely comforting in knowing that your own steps are added to this invisible archive. Long after you leave, some trace of your presence will hum softly through the bones of the building. Of course, the cafés are full of ghosts. Not the frightening kind. No rattling chains here, but the gentler ghosts of conversations and smoke. If you sit long enough at a corner table, you can almost hear the murmur of voices layered on top of one another across decades. Someone once laughed, where you sit now. Someone once cried. Someone once fell in love or wrote the first line of a story or planned a future that never came. All of it remains, suspended in the air like dust motes swirling lazily in a shaft of light. These quiet legacies remind you that not every life needs to be spectacular to be remembered. A scarf left behind in a studio, a doodle in the margin of a borrowed book, a line of melody hummed in a stairwell, heard once and never again. These are the tiny imprints that persist long after names are forgotten. They may not change the world, but they enrich it in subtler ways, layering the present with textures of the past. And so, as you sit in your own small corner, whether at a cafe, or in your garret, or beneath the glow of a lamp, you realize that you too are leaving something behind. A word, a smile, a kindness, a quarrel. The city gathers all of it, folds it gently into itself, and carries it forward. One day someone else may pass through and feel your trace without knowing it, just as you feel the ones who came before. Montparnasse hums with these legacies in quiet corners, and that is perhaps the most enduring truth of Bohemian life. It's not fame, not fortune, but fragments of humanity left behind in odd places. It's reminders that you were here, that you mattered, even if only for a moment. And so as we let the streets of Montparnasse grow quiet again, you find yourself pausing on the edge of it all. The cafés still hum faintly, the jazz grows softer, and the gas lamps flicker out one by one. The heroin craze, the smoke, the fevered creativity, all of it fades into memory. What remains are the women who lived it, worked it, endured it. Not heroines in the grand sense, perhaps, but survivors in the everyday one. Women who made art from scraps, love from hunger, and laughter from sorrow. Their lives remind you that history is not always about monuments and battles. Sometimes it lingers in tiny gestures, a poem scribbled on a napkin, a scarf left on a chair, the warmth of a hand held on a cold night. These are the quiet echoes that survive, even when the big stories move on. And in their resilience, in their persistence to create beauty despite poverty and hardship, there is a kind of inheritance for us all. As you return to the present, you might feel a small gratitude for the comforts of your own life bread that is plentiful. Warmth at the touch of a switch, health less fragile than it once was. Yet you also carry with you the enduring spirit of Montparnasse, that stubborn belief that even in the leanest times, art and love and laughter are worth making space for. So let the city rest now. Let the hum quiet to a steady whisper. Close your eyes and imagine yourself in that attic room where the night is cold but the heart is still warm, and the faint pulse of Paris carries you gently to sleep. Good night.